I got it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to throw it up. You hit the whoa, and that'll be part of our action, okay? Ready?
Oh, gosh. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it
I'll
good.
catch it. Action. Come on, that's you.
Hi, welcome to episode 3 of Online with OnPoint.
Hey everybody, so glad that you are joining us this morning for, again, our 3rd episode of Online with OnPoint. So glad you're here. Today's going to be a little bit different, and we'll get to that in a second, but before we jump into week 4, this is our final week of the Doubt It series. Why don't you go ahead and kind of recap where we've been weeks 1 through 3.
So week 1 of our Doubt It series, we talked about how we all have questions within our faith and within our walk with God. Week 2, we talked about Gideon and how his story helped us understand how God doesn't shame us for our questions. And then last week, we discussed the story of Job, and we talked about how sometimes our questions don't always get answered. So as we enter into week 4, we're going to be focusing on how people help us with those questions.
Yeah, so again, kind of rolling within that, we're in week 4 here, and I think I was so excited to end on this week because time and time again, in moments when I've had doubts and questions, I have seen God use people to carry me through, guide me. Since week 1, we've been talking about, not letting your doubts or your questions lead you to a dead end, but more of an opportunity for them to lead you closer to where God is calling you and to Jesus. And so many times that happens in relationships with people who are leading. And some of that just comes from our emphasis that we do all the time of understanding that we have a very relational God, and God has designed us for relationships. And so that is why I think specifically this week, as we've been talking about doubts and questions for so long, especially coming off of a week like last week where we looked at Job and, kind of in that unsettling resolution of, man, there's just going to be times where we're just not going to have answers. But to have people, again, the way God uses people time and time again, not only in scripture, but the way he's using people in our lives. And so that's why today is going to look a little bit different. So I just wanted us to share a little bit of our lives in how people have shaped us along our faith journey, in times of doubt, in times of questions, but also just in the direction of leading us away from that dead end and closer to God. And so what I want to do is I'm just going to open it up to you, and I would love for you to just share with our audience or whoever is watching Online with OnPoint. I just would love for you to share of a few people who have impacted your life and have steered you more closely and more intimate with Jesus, whether it's been in times of doubt and questioning, whether it's just been through the ups and downs, or just whether it's been through their persistence or their perseverance with you, their patience, or I don't know, but I just love to hear your thoughts.
So I think that the most common response would definitely be my family, my parents. I was blessed to have very strong-willed, very determined, very hardworking parents who came from very broken homes, and so they easily could have fallen into the same brokenness that their family had spawned from. But I was blessed to have parents who have been great role models as a godly man, as a godly woman, as a godly marriage, and so that's helped shape my siblings as well, which I'm the second oldest of 5, and so but even then, like my sister, who's only 2 years younger than me, she's also great because we have such different personalities, but we're sisters, so we're always very open and honest with each other. She's definitely challenged me within my walk and pointed me into like the direction of where God's leading, rather than feeding me things that I want to hear, which I think is always really important, to have people surrounding you, pointing you towards Jesus, whether you want to hear the things that they're saying or not. And then when I was about in my early 20s, I met Richie. He was a pastor of a church that I had started going to without my parents. It was me and my sister, and we were looking for a church home, and we walked into Legacy. And
sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Can you briefly kind of interject there of like what you were looking for kind of in that like season of life of why you wandered into that church? Because I know it was kind of a new city for you, a new school, a new kind of transition in life.
Definitely.
But talk about how the church.
Yeah.
I know Richie specifically because Richie, I mean, impacted both of our lives in a major way. But that church really played a major role in.
We came from a very traditional Presbyterian church. Loved everyone there. Great impact in our childhood and in our lives. People, relationships that we'll have forever. But when we moved, nothing kind of replaced that. There was nothing that would measure up to it, and so my family had a hard time getting back into a routine of going to church and being active in a church family. And so then I ventured out and started looking for a church home. Like I wanted some type of relationship that wasn't just me by myself, but with other people who are searching and looking for God and for worship and things like that. And so when me and my sister walked into Legacy, it was very unlike any church we've ever been a part of. We were used to like our Sunday best dresses and shoes and looking really nice, where, you know, we walked in and everyone had jeans and flannel shirts and tattoos, and it was just very different from what I grew up with. And so immediately it was very like, I was curious, and then we heard worship and we loved everything about the worship, and Mike was the worship leader, who was a very close family friend of ours. And then we heard Richie preach, and he is just a really great leader, very great communicator, but also within that, he's very relational. And so he went out of his way to talk to us and make us feel welcomed, and, you know, continued to do that and to pursue us to have that relationship, not only with me and my sister, but also my family, because then my family started coming to the church. My mom saw the impact, and a couple months in to going, I want to say that summer, and then that fall, I went home and said I wanted to be baptized. My mom had no idea what that meant. She was like, "What are you talking about?" I was baptized Catholic when I was a little girl because of family traditions rather than because we wanted to believe in God. So she was like, "You're already baptized. Why did you want to get baptized again?" And so then when she came to my baptism, I think she was kind of hit with a reality of there's purpose. Something's different and there's purpose behind it. And that was how God used Richie for my life and my walk. So.
Yeah. And Richie, you know, again, you've heard us talk about Richie before, but I definitely think, you know, anytime we've kind of been rattling our brains the last few hours preparing for this of who are those people? And, you know, for both of us, one of the first names that comes to both of our mind is Richie, just because of the type of person he was, had so much in his life that he had gone through, but it was through his impact and the ways in which he lived within his faith was so kind of just so inspiring, but it was so challenging too, to actually, the way he built relationships with people, challenged them just in being in the same room as Richie, just brought you closer to Jesus. It was just amazing, kind of his faith in that. So yeah, definitely. I mean, and you kind of even shared through your parents too, and your family specifically. And I think family is a huge piece for our ability. And I think even, you know, knowing with students, you know, it can be challenging, you know, those teenage years, and you know, I certainly had my years of rebellion.
That's what I'm saying. Not to say that I was perfect. I mean, there were times where I did anything and everything not to listen to my parents. But I think as you get older, you learn to appreciate where they're coming from and why they're saying the things they're saying and why they're trying to parent with their parenting.
Yeah, as perspective changes, for sure. You definitely look back and kind of wish you know, things were, maybe you had acted or done things a little bit different. But you know, for me specifically, you talk about family and that of you know, I shared about how important and how impactful my sisters were for me. You know, we we all grew up in a divorced home from the time I was 3 when my parents got divorced. But and growing up with several different parents, and just in kind of the Walmart transitions of pulling into the parking lot and shifting the bag from one car to the other, and every other weekend, and some of that is you grow really dependent on those who are sharing your experiences with you. And obviously for us and our family, it was my siblings and my sisters. And so I think it's so easy when you're a teenager to want to write off your siblings and write off your parents, and just because you want independence, you want to get out, you want to but I would challenge you to cherish those moments. Because again, those as you grow older, as you look back, you'll be surprised at the impact of just how much your family has played into that. So okay, so Richie, who else?
My family, Richie. I guess when we first got married, are the people on Mountain, our Mountain Church family. They're amazing. But it was a hard season of life for us as newlyweds and expecting a baby, and they just had a group of people pour into us and walk us through that season of life, which is amazing within that. And then even after that, I mean, it still wasn't easy. We left and moved to Miami. And down there, we decided to seek counseling, which I think was one of the best experiences for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Individually and as a married couple. But even just, having someone pour into you or just listen and help you sort through your thoughts and your emotions, and try to help you organize those in a professional, healthy manner, rather than relying on your own understanding and your own mindset. So I know. So even you kind of breeze through the Mountain one real quick, and I want to touch base on that again, because part of that is I was working at the church and things, and the season of life we were in was very difficult, very challenging, but the ways in which they spoke into our lives through the amount of grace they poured into us, by the amount of challenge they did challenge us a lot to move closer into a more intimate relationship with Jesus. But part of that, as a young married couple, we look up to a lot. One of my supervisors, one of the ministry leaders in the area that I was working for, is the one who actually performed our wedding. And in that is still a ministry partner of who I try to talk to frequently, but even from time to time, Rosa and I both will sit down and try to meet, or sometimes over FaceTime and things, with him and his wife, just as an opportunity for us. And the reason I bring that up is I think any area of life, for us in this area was definitely our marriage. But I would even venture to say, if you were to talk to any good businessman or anybody that's experienced in whatever field they are, the impact of being in relationship with someone who's a step ahead of you, right? It's just been, I was given that advice years ago, and it's just one of those things that I think has been so impactful. So for us as newlyweds, we weren't even, we were in our first year of marriage. For us to sit at a table and to sit and be in relationship with people who had been married years and years, that was just so beneficial for us. Now, obviously, you guys aren't married in those things, but as you guys are deciding on what's next, and I would advise, finding those people who are a step ahead of you, maybe even 2 steps ahead of you, that can speak into your life, that can kind of challenge you in those ways, and in those seasons of, we were definitely in a season of frustration and doubt and darkness, and it was within us trying to work through some of that the those who were already kind of a step ahead and had already walked through dark seasons of their own were able to speak into the dark season we were in, and then fast forward that to our experience in Miami. I was seeking counseling individually, and then kind of morphed into us going through counseling together. And that's, again, another one. So we've talked about family,
which was huge. We talked about that pastoral relationship with Richie and just how amazing and relational he was. That spoke into our faith journey. Seeing people who are a step ahead of you. And then that fourth piece of like, man, counseling is so incredibly important. And I know it gets a bad rap, and people, you know, I don't know why that is, but I do know, you know, there's something about our culture and our society today that says we want to figure it out on our own. We want to do this alone. We don't want to burden people. We don't want to ask for help. I say that's a load of crock, because when we are able to humble ourselves enough to be in relationship and to seek help, man, God uses those moments. And I've seen it time and time again in my life. And the counseling was a huge impact on our lives. I mean, it was not only me personally carrying on to things that I've been carrying on for years that I just never knew, but it was affecting me as a husband, me as a father, and those types of things. And so, yeah, I mean, counseling, I just can't speak into that enough. I think whether you would consider yourself mentally healthy or not, I would advise everybody should be in counseling. It just is beneficial for everybody in every season.
The key that you said is like obviously humbling yourself and understanding that the importance of counseling, but also knowing that you're not going there to have someone feed into all the things that you want to hear. And I think that's the challenging part. That's the humbling part. You knowing that I can't do this on my own. As much as I try to tell myself I can do it on my own, there's something that I need that I can't provide for myself, and only God can. And that's by having people pour into me who are going to help shape me in a healthy way, in a professional way. Because that's also like, you know, they're professionals. So they know things that we may never understand or know how to cope with unless given direction from a professional like a counselor.
Yeah. And I'll come back to that word perspective again. Counseling and therapy has helped shift my perspective so much in how I understand things about not only ministry, but families. So yeah, that's a big piece of that. And I think what's interesting in this conversation, which, you know, again, I'll transition because I do want to get to a place where we're moving a little bit into just briefly the story that I want to challenge you guys to read today. But you know, in those moments, you talk about the humbling experience of asking for, relying and being dependent, which I think is a great opportunity for us. You know, the way God uses people is a small image or a small reflection of our dependency and reliance on Him. You know, because following God is a very humbling experience, because we are designed and created to be fully devoted, fully reliant, fully leaning on God and His wisdom. We talked a little bit about that with Job last week, and Gideon the week before, where in Gideon's case, where he's, you know, Israel is in that enslaved period. They've been handed over to the Midianites, and that battle of, like, even in the midst of his questions of why and how, each of those questions, those doubts, was moving him closer and closer to a place of becoming more and more reliant on God, which I think ultimately how God uses people so much in our lives is through the lens of our ability in moving us to a place of becoming more and more reliant on God. Because I think it's one of those things that counseling has done for us, is we kind of had to be at a place of fully admitting that we can't do this on our own. We can't, we're not designed to do this on our own. I think that's so big. Like when we read scripture, when we see so many stories in the Bible, we're just not designed to do things alone. We're just not.
And even in a marriage, like, you know, and I mean, that was huge for us. Like, you know, we were newlyweds, we had each other, all we need is each other. But at the end of the day, that's not always true. Yeah. You know?
Well, and we're imperfect, right? Of course. And that's, you know, part of that humbling. And that's why I say the small pieces of like a small reflection of our reliance and dependency on God, because, you know, yeah, we don't want to find our full reliance and dependence on other people because they're imperfect and will fail. And whereas, you know, if we can get to a place of finding our full reliance, our full dependence on God, who's perfect, and will never fail, we have a different foundation piece that will last us into eternity, rather than the short term of what feels good and what feels like makes us happy. Those types of kind of emotional types of decisions that can sometimes lead us astray, rather than, man, if we can surround ourselves with people who are leading us into a more dependent and a more intentional and more intimate relationship with God, then that's the win. And I think it does take humility. I think it takes a lot of awareness of being aware of the people around you, because in my years and it's changed and shifted certain relationships. I've had to shift away from certain relationships and into other relationships and those types of things. But yeah, I definitely think that. And so, which kind of leads us into today's story that I want to challenge you all to read, and that's the story of Esther. And you know a little bit of the story of Esther, and you told me.
You guys, he asked me, "Oh, did you read?" I was like, "I have all of Esther's VeggieTale movie in my head for eternity, so yeah. I'm golden." Yeah.
So I find the reason I wanted to, it is, VeggieTales. You learn so much from that stuff. Esther's such an interesting book to me in its entirety. Yes, Esther is a character, but her book in the Bible is so interesting. Esther takes place 100 years after the Babylonian exile, where they are actually, the people that is taking place into the story is actually happening in a Persian city, and there's a small Jewish community that is in the midst of this Persian community. And part of this story, and I'll let you kind of read some of this on your own, but the king has a right-hand man who essentially puts it out through his anger and frustration that he has the king sign a decree that all the Jewish people in the city would be killed. Now, in the background of all this stuff is happening, there's these characters, Esther and Mordecai, and again, within this is what's so fascinating about the book. Okay, it's a book in the Bible, and it never once mentions God. That's fascinating to me, that there is a book in the Bible that never mentions God, although time and time again within the story we see God at work, even though he's not like a plot character or a main character that's written into the story. He's a background character that we know is there, and we can see the way that he's using Mordecai and Esther in one another's lives to speak speaking within their relationship, that ultimately leads them to saving the Jews, saving the Israelites that are kind of exiled into the city in Persia. And it's just such a fascinating story. But there's a line in this, and I kind of wanted to end on this thought. Is there's a line in chapter 4 where Mordecai and Esther are in this conversation, because part of this is they're in exile, and it's just come out that the decree has come out that all the Jewish people are going to be. Now, in the background, what's happened prior is the queen has been cast out because she speaks up when she wasn't meant to be speaking to the king, whatever. And so he kind of pulls out this beauty pageant, has all the women in the land to kind of stand, and Esther wins, and he has no idea that she's Jewish. And so he signs this decree that all Jewish people are, and Mordecai and Esther having this conversation. I can't imagine Esther's feeling through all of this, right? Like she knows the Torah, which is, she's part of the Jewish tradition. She's a part, she was involved in a Jewish community. She would have known of the light. So for her to be now appointed to queen of this Persian city, would have been pretty drastic, and especially for a decree that was sent out to kill her people. And so there's an interesting dialogue between Mordecai and Esther in chapter 4. And Mordecai speaks to Esther, and I'll just read it real quick. It says, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And so Mordecai in this moment is saying, man, there's so many things that have happened in this story that don't make sense, that leave us in this, like, what's God doing? But maybe, just maybe, God has appointed Esther in that moment, in her seat, for such a time as this. And I think when we're talking about doubts and we're talking about questions, as we bring this series to a close, what would you say in this nature of things of for such a time as this? Like, could there be purpose? Could there be an intention for why we are facing the doubts and the questions we have? And how does that speak into our relationship with God?
I think it's huge, even in the story with Mordecai, like knowing that him and Esther have a relationship. They're basically family, like, you know. And
so
I
think it's like an uncle niece type of relationship.
And so knowing that your family is the one challenging you with this dialogue, not because they want to make you feel better and they know you're in this tough situation, but he's telling her, like, there's a reason. Like, you know, are you going to own up? Are you going to step up to the plate and understand why you're in this position? And so I think that the weight of knowing that they're, like, Mordecai is challenging her within her faith, like, and telling her you need to be bold within this decision making is huge. And knowing and help. And I think that was the push to make her understand her purpose and why she was placed in the situation she was placed in.
Yeah.
Because if she wasn't there, how would that all have played out? Like, you know?
Which it's fascinating, and I'll end with this, because it's fascinating you said that, of how Mordecai's conversation with her actually pushed her into a deeper faith, which essentially is how God uses people in our lives too, right? Like, we should be surrounding ourselves with people in the midst of our questions, our doubts, our fears, our frustrations, our angers, whatever we're going through in life. We should be surrounding ourselves with people who push us into deeper faith. And her response to that is maybe there's purpose, right, of Mordecai. Maybe there's purpose and intention. Maybe you were put here in this position for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa, the city that they're in, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, because she knows she's not supposed to speak to the king. The last time the queen did that, she got sent out, right? And then it ends with this: and if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. And like how, again, there's so many things in our faith journey that don't make sense, we don't have answers for, we don't always have a direction to, but it's called faith because we are stepping into what God is moving us in the direction he's moving us, even in the midst of the questions we have, and even in the midst of the doubts we have, and even if it's into kind of this unknown nature of what the next step is. And she's hit to a point, because of the relationship with Mordecai, like you said, of how God is using people in that relationship, of, man, if I perish, I perish. Is it all worth it? Like, this is it, right? And so, I'm encouraged by that. I would encourage you to continue to go in and actually read the story of Esther. It's a great book. And again, just within that fascination of, like, not once does it actually mention God in the story, but you see God at work throughout the story, which is pretty fascinating. So, so I've really enjoyed this series. I would love for this not to be the end of the conversation on doubt and questions, because I think the season of life that we're experiencing in our world, it gives us reason to have questions and to have doubts. I think one of the scariest things, though, with questions and doubts is when we don't try to seek answers, or when we just kind of leave them lingering. And although we may not always get the answers, I don't want us to be at a place of kind of stagnation or that dead end within it. And so feel free to reach out to Rosa and I. Feel free to reach out to your small group leaders who should be reaching out to you. Feel free to join us tonight on our Zoom small group gathering tonight at 8. Don't go through the questions and the doubts alone.
Mm-hmm.
You're not alone in your questions and doubts. It was how we started. We end with, don't try to approach them alone, right? Like, don't go at it alone. Like, you need people, you need relationships, and you need to be in those relationships who are pushing you to be fully reliant, fully dependent on God. Any other thoughts, final thoughts?
No, I think within that, just challenging you guys to look around and see, you know, who do I have that's making an impact?
Yeah, who's cheering me on?
Who's cheering me on? Who's coaching me? Who's helping me get closer to Jesus? Who are those people? And if you don't have those people, am I actively seeking those people? So I think that's the biggest challenge after listening to the story and listening to us in this discussion. Just reflect.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to pray and then, enjoy the rest of your day. Father God, we're so thankful for you. What an amazing God that you are, and what an amazing opportunity we have that you've given us relationships and people around us who want to push us closer to you. And may we continue to seek those relationships out. May we continue to reflect on the power of those relationships as we seek to lay our full reliance and dependency on you, even in the midst of our doubts, even in the midst of our questions, even in the midst of the things that are happening within our lives. Let us lean on you. Let us seek you, search you, and may you make yourself known to us. And so we are just so thankful for an opportunity that we can just kind of reflect and think back on the people that you've put into our story, a part of our journey, the people who've impacted us and moved us closer into a more intimate relationship with you. And may that be of encouragement to all those listening and watching, to think of, like, man, who are those people in my life that are pointing me closer to Jesus? And if there are those people in my life, maybe I should give them a little more attention, because those are the people who are going to play a major role within our eternity. And so, again, we're so thankful for you and all you do for us. Bless our day, bless our week. Continue to pray for those who are continuing to be affected by this virus. Continuing to pray for the doctors and the nurses that are helping and assisting and putting in the long hours and the hard work to mitigate the virus that is just sweeping throughout the globe. And so just thank you, and let us see your perspective and your purpose for such a time as this. And again, we're so thankful for you. Your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Love you guys.
Deuces.